The marble hall of the Steele estate gleamed with ruthless perfection, every chandelier crystal polished until it threw back shards of light like diamonds. Guests had already departed, their polite applause and empty congratulations fading into memory. What lingered now was silence, heavy and expectant, pressing in on Adrian Steele as he loosened the knot of his black tie. The wedding had been flawless, of course. Nothing Adrian touched was allowed to be anything less. The flowers had been imported from Holland, the champagne from France, the guest list curated to include only those whose presence could tilt power in his favor. Even the vows had been stripped down to efficiency. There had been no trembling professions of love, no soft glances exchanged between bride and groom. Only signatures on legal documents and polite smiles staged for photographs. Adrian Steele was 35 years old and the undisputed king of his empire. He had built Steele International from the ground up with nothing but ambition and the kind of cold brilliance that terrified rivals into silence. His reputation was carved from steel, unbending and unforgiving. And now, after years of calculated victories, he had taken a wife, not for love, but for legacy. Maya Rao had walked into his life not by chance, but by necessity. Her father's sudden death had left her family's tech company vulnerable, its patents valuable enough to ignite a feeding frenzy among predators. Adrian had offered a solution: stability, protection, and resources in exchange for her hand. A merger wrapped in a marriage contract, paper to shield paper. He expected her to resist, to break under the pressure of his terms. Instead, she had agreed with a poise that unsettled him. And now she sat across the room, her posture relaxed, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her wedding gown, an elegant silk sheath that whispered against the carpet when she moved, had been replaced with a pale robe, soft against the warm tones of her skin. Her dark eyes followed him, calm, unyielding, filled with a quiet intelligence that refused to shrink beneath his shadow. Adrian studied her the way he studied markets and enemies, searching for weakness. He found none. "This," he said at last, his voice a low command in the stillness, "is a business arrangement. You'll have my name, my protection, my wealth, but never my heart." The words hung sharp in the air, deliberate as a knife stroke. He expected tears, perhaps indignation, or even icy silence. He expected something human that he could control, categorize, and dismiss. Instead, Maya's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. She rose with the grace of someone who had been underestimated all her life and learned to wield that underestimation like armor. Crossing the room, she stopped just shy of his reach, her presence quiet but undeniably powerful. "I see," she said, her tone even, as if his cruelty were nothing more than a line in a contract she had already read. Her gaze locked with his, unflinching. "If that is your vow, Adrian Steele, then so be it." For a fleeting moment, his certainty wavered. There was no tremor in her voice, no flicker of fear, only composure, threaded with something he couldn't name. Maya tilted her head slightly, the silk of her robe catching the lamplight, making her seem almost ethereal. She leaned in, her words soft, intimate, meant only for him. "One day," she whispered, "you'll regret those words." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even defiance. It was prophecy, spoken with the calm confidence of someone who already knew the ending of a story he had only just begun. Adrian's jaw tightened. For the first time in years, the man who had conquered industries and crushed rivals felt the faintest flicker of unease. And us from him. Maya Rao stood serene, her silence more dangerous than any outburst could have been. The marriage, sealed on paper, had just begun. But in the unspoken space between them, a battle neither had planned for was already underway. Rain drummed against the tall glass windows of the Steele penthouse as the city skyline glittered beyond, distant and unreachable. 3 weeks had passed since the wedding, and Adrian Steele had mastered the art of silence. He left the penthouse before dawn, returning long after midnight, his schedule packed with endless meetings, negotiations, and hostile takeovers that kept him firmly in control of everything, except the woman who now carried his name. Maya filled the space he abandoned with her own quiet authority. She moved through the mansion like it was hers by right, not gift or arrangement. The staff adored her, the society pages praised her composure, and the city whispered that Maya Rao had slipped into the role of Mrs. Steele with elegance that no one expected. She attended galas without him, her gowns cutting sharp lines of defiance across photographs splashed on financial blogs. She was graceful, intelligent, untouchable, and Adrian hated that it was all happening without him. Every night he returned, he told himself he would not notice the faint trace of her perfume in the hall, the lingering warmth in the cushions where she had sat reading, the glow of light under her study door where she worked late into the night. Yet he noticed everything. He told himself the arrangement was working perfectly. She lived her life, he lived his, and the contract held strong. But silence has a way of cracking even steel. One evening, he came home earlier than planned. The storm outside had canceled his meetings, forcing him into the one place he had been avoiding. The penthouse was alive with music, a low, soulful rhythm that drifted down the hallway. He followed the sound, his steps silent on marble floors, until he reached the living room. And there she was. Maya, barefoot, in fitted black leggings and a cropped silk top, moving as if the storm outside had seeped into her body. Her hair was piled carelessly on her head, strands falling loose as she spun, lost in the rhythm. Candlelight painted her skin in warm gold, and for the first time since the wedding, Adrian saw her without armor. No designer gowns, no practiced smiles, just a woman surrendering to music, utterly unaware of his gaze. Something shifted in him. The man who had closed every door on intimacy, who had spoken vows with ice in his veins, found himself rooted to the spot, breath caught in his throat. He had stared down competitors, ruined rivals with a single contract, but watching his paper wife dance alone, unguarded, he felt powerless. A floorboard creaked beneath his weight. Maya stopped mid-turn. Her eyes widened as she spotted him, her breath catching for a fraction of a second before her expression reset into something composed, something cool. She reached for the remote and cut the music. Silence fell heavy between them. "How long have you been standing there?" she demanded, her voice steady, but he could see the faint flush rising on her cheeks. "Not long," Adrian lied, his tone rougher than intended. "I didn't mean to intrude." She crossed her arms, chin tilting higher. "You're home early." "The storm canceled my meetings." He gestured vaguely toward the windows where lightning split the sky. Another silence stretched. He should have left it there, walked away as always. But the words slipped out before he could stop them. "You dance beautifully." Maya froze. The compliment was simple, but coming from Adrian Steele, it was more shocking than thunder outside. Her eyes narrowed slightly, searching his face for mockery. Finding none, she inclined her head. "Thank you," she said cautiously. The lights flickered once, twice, then cut out completely. The city plunged into darkness. The storm raged louder, thunder cracking so violently the windows trembled. Maya's phone lit up, a narrow beam cutting through the shadows, illuminating her features from below, her cheekbones sharp, her lips parted in surprise. "There are candles in the kitchen," she said, already moving past him, her robe brushing against his arm, "and lanterns in the hall closet." Adrian stood in the sudden darkness, pulse unsteady. For the first time in years, the empire builder, the ruthless millionaire, felt the strange pull of something he could neither control nor explain. His wife was still a stranger, but in the glow of candlelight and storm, she was becoming something far more dangerous to him than any rival he had ever faced. The night of the gala arrived with the weight of inevitability. The city's elite gathered beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Metropolitan Museum, their laughter echoing through marble halls gilded with history and ambition. Adrian Steele adjusted his bow tie in the limousine's tinted window, his reflection cold and unreadable. This evening was a performance, another stage upon which he would prove the strength of Steele International. What he had not prepared for was the woman seated beside him. Maya emerged from the penthouse in a gown that silenced even Adrian. Midnight blue silk clung to her form before spilling into a sweeping train, the daring slit at her leg balanced by the elegance of a neckline that bared just enough. Her hair was swept up, her skin luminous, her every movement commanding without effort. Adrian told himself it was strategy. A beautiful wife drew cameras, charmed investors, softened sharp edges. But when Maya's eyes met his, calm and steady, he felt something far more dangerous stir within him. Inside the museum, the crowd surged around them like an ocean. Investors and board members approached, shaking Adrian's hand, but their eyes lingered on Maya. She spoke with ease, her laughter rich, her elegance evident in every reply. Where Adrian was feared, Maya was admired. Together they were magnetic, a force no one could ignore. For the first time, Adrian understood the genius of appearances not built on fear, but fascination. When the orchestra struck up a waltz, Adrian found his composure slipping. He crossed the room, cutting through conversations and polite smiles, until he stood before her. Extending his hand, he asked with deliberate formality, "May I have this dance, Mrs. Steele?" Surprise flickered in her eyes before her lips curved into something warmer. "Of course, Mr. Steele." On the dance floor, their bodies moved in practiced synchrony, though neither had rehearsed this role. His hand at her waist felt natural, her gaze lifted to his with a question he refused to answer. Around them, the room blurred, conversations fading, the music wrapping them in a world that seemed to belong only to the two of them. "You know," Maya said softly, "when you told me our marriage was only paper, I believed you meant to build walls. But here we are in front of everyone playing husband and wife as if we were born to it." "It is strategy," Adrian replied, though the words lacked conviction. His thumb brushed against the silk at her back, his chest tightening at the heat radiating from her body. Before she could answer, a voice cut through the music, smooth and sharp as glass. "Maya. Or should I say Mrs. Steele?" The name struck Adrian like a blade. He turned to see Damien Cross approaching, tall and commanding, his smile predatory. Every detail about him radiated menace polished into charm. The air shifted instantly, the orchestra's music dimming beneath the tension that rippled through Maya's body. "Damien," Adrian said, extending his hand with cool control, though his eyes never left Maya's. "So this is the man who won what I once held?" Damien said, clasping Adrian's hand with calculated force. So he turned to Maya, his gaze lingering too long. "Marriage agrees with you. You glow." Maya's smile was brittle, her voice carefully measured. "It has been a long time, Damien." Adrian felt her stiffen under his hand, and in that moment he knew the past she had hidden from him had a name, and it stood before them dressed in a rival's suit. Damien's eyes gleamed with unspoken knowledge, his presence a storm that promised to unravel everything Adrian thought he controlled. As the waltz ended and applause rose from the crowd, Adrian bent close to Maya's ear, his voice low and edged with steel. "Tell me who he is." Maya's gaze flickered to Damien, then back to Adrian, her composure flawless, but her eyes carrying a shadow he had never seen before. "He is the reason I agreed to marry you," she whispered, "and the reason neither of us is safe." The limousine ride back from the gala was steeped in silence. Adrian's jaw was set like stone, his hand clenched loosely against his knee, the other tightening around the crystal tumbler he hadn't touched. Maya sat beside him, her back straight, her eyes fixed on the city lights rushing past the window. Neither spoke, but the air between them pulsed with questions unsaid. Inside the penthouse, Adrian finally broke the silence. His voice was low, but dangerous. "Who is he to you, Maya?" His gaze burned into her, unrelenting, demanding the truth. Maya slipped off her heels and placed them neatly by the door. Her calmness only fueled the storm in him. "He was once my fiancé," she said evenly. "Years ago, it ended before it ever began." Adrian's eyes narrowed. Damien Cross is not a man who simply lets things end. What happened? Maya turned to face him. Her expression was still, but her eyes betrayed the shadow of old wounds. "He betrayed me. He wanted my company, not me. He wanted my patents, my work, my future. Marriage to him would have been a cage, and I was not willing to be his prisoner." Adrian exhaled slowly, the confession slicing through him in ways he could not name. He should have been relieved that Maya had left Damien to Hatchie was standing here as his wife. But what struck him harder was the realization that Damien had once stood where he now stood and had wanted her too. The thought unsettled him more than he cared to admit. The following week, the storm Damien promised began to show itself. Whispers surfaced in the financial press, subtle doubts about the legitimacy of the Steel-Rao merger. Anonymous sources claimed Maya had a history of abandoning projects, of leaving investors in ruin. None of it was true, but the headlines were damning. Adrian's board members grew restless, urging caution, urging distance from the woman who was supposedly only his wife on paper. At a private dinner with key investors, Adrian watched as Damien made his move. Dressed in a midnight suit, Damien commanded attention with practiced charm. He spoke of market trends, of opportunity, and then with surgical precision, he shifted. One wonders, he said with mock casualness, what might happen if a company's leadership carried unresolved conflicts from the past. His eyes slid deliberately to Maya across the table. The room chilled. Adrian's hand tightened around his glass, fury building like a tide. But before he could speak, Maya leaned forward, her voice calm but cutting. The past does not dictate the future, Damien. My company merged with Steel International because we share vision and integrity, qualities I know you have never understood. A ripple of tension passed through the table. Adrian felt something sharp and electric move through him. Pride, protectiveness, desire. She was not cowering, she was striking back. When the dinner ended and Damien had retreated with that sly smile that promised more battles ahead, Adrian placed his hand at the small of Maya's back as they left. For the first time, it was not for performance, it was instinct. In the car, his voice was rougher than he intended. You see, would you ground tonight? Maya turned to him, her features softened by the city's glow. Did you expect me not to? Adrian hesitated. For a man who thrived on control, uncertainty was foreign. And yet tonight, watching her take on Damien without flinching, he felt something shift inside him. He had thought of her as his paper bride, a name, a contract, a shield. But Maya Rao was proving herself to be far more than he had ever anticipated. She was not a pawn in his empire. She was fire, and fire could not be contained by paper. As the storm outside raged on, Adrian realized that the real danger was not Damien Cross. It was the woman sitting beside him. Because for the first time in his carefully controlled life, Adrian Steele was beginning to lose control. The storm that Damien had set in motion grew darker with every passing day. Adrian woke to the sound of his phone buzzing on the nightstand, a dozen alerts flashing across the screen. News feeds screamed with headlines painting Maya as reckless, manipulative, even dangerous. Anonymous sources claimed she had once stolen code from a rival. Others whispered that her sudden marriage to Adrian was nothing more than a cover for secrets she did not want uncovered. Adrian stood at the window of the penthouse, the skyline before him a battlefield of glass towers. His empire had weathered countless storms, but never one that threatened from within his own home. Maya entered the room, her robe tied tightly around her, her face pale but her posture unbroken. She had read the headlines too. Damien is trying to destroy me, she said quietly. No, Adrian corrected her, his voice sharp with conviction. He is trying to destroy us. That day, the board summoned Adrian to an emergency session. The conference room was thick with suspicion. Gregory, the oldest of the members, leaned forward, his tone diplomatic but heavy. These accusations may be baseless, but perception matters. Perhaps Mrs. Steele should step back until this storm clears. Adrian's gaze swallowed at the room, cold and cutting. He wanted them to feel the steel in his name. Step back, he repeated slowly. You want me to betray my wife to appease a man who thrives on deceit. Gregory shifted uncomfortably, but another voice rose from the end of the table. Damien Cross had been invited under the guise of transparency, and now he stood, smiling like a wolf in a field of sheep. It is not betrayal, Damien purred. It is prudence. Surely you see that, Adrian. Surely you know she cannot shield you from the truth forever. Adrian's hand clenched into a fist beneath the table, but Maya's fingers brushed his under the polished wood, a silent plea for calm. She spoke then, her voice steady, carrying more power than any board member expected. If I step back, it will look like guilt. If I fight, it looks like defiance. But Damien is not here for truth. He is here because I left him at the altar years ago. This is revenge wrapped in business. Gasps rippled through the room. Damien's mask cracked for a single moment, a flash of fury betraying him before he smoothed it away. Adrian rose, his voice low and dangerous. You heard her. This is not business. It is vendetta. And Steel International does not bend to vendettas. The meeting dissolved into chaos, but the seed had been planted. The city buzzed louder now, reporters chasing shadows, investors doubting, enemies circling like vultures. Adrian and Maya returned to the penthouse, the weight of the world pressing in. She collapsed onto the sofa, exhaustion seeping into her bones. You didn't have to defend me, she whispered. Adrian stood before her, his fists unclenching at last. Yes, I did. You are my wife. You are my partner, and I will not let Damien Cross or anyone else tear you from me. Maya's eyes softened, but there was sorrow hidden there too. You will regret this, Adrian, she murmured. The deeper you stand with me, the more he will try to ruin you. Adrian knelt before her, taking her hands into his own. Let him try. He has never faced me at my full strength, and now he will face both of us. For the first time since the night of their wedding, the words did not feel like an arrangement or an act. They felt like a vow born not of contracts, but of something more dangerous and more binding. Damien had unleashed war, but what he had not expected was that in the fire of his attacks, Adrian Steele and Maya Rao would begin to forge themselves into something unbreakable. The city pulsed with tension as if it too felt the tightening grip of Damien's schemes. Adrian returned to the penthouse late, his tie loose, his eyes dark with the strain of fighting battles on every front. Maya was already in the study, her laptop open, lines of code glowing on the screen, her fingers moving with restless precision. She had spent hours combing through data leaks and contracts, trying to trace the invisible hand that Damien had planted inside their company. Adrian watched her from the doorway, his chest tightening with something he did not want to name. She was not just enduring the storm, she was fighting it. And with every hour she fought, she became less the paper bride he had signed into his world, and more the equal he had never known he needed. The storm outside roared louder, rain hammering against the glass. A bolt of lightning split the sky, plunging the penthouse into darkness as the power cut out. Maya gasped softly, the glow of her laptop flickering before it too died. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the drum of rain and the erratic beat of Adrian's heart. He stepped inside, his voice rougher than intended. Stay here, I'll light the lanterns. But Maya's hand reached for his arm, stopping him mid-stride. Her touch was warm, steady, grounding. The candles are in the drawer, she said, her voice steady though her pulse raced beneath her skin. He struck a match, and in the sudden flare of light, her face was revealed, soft and luminous, shadows plying across her features. Adrian set the candle between them, but the space that had always felt like a wall now seemed too narrow, too charged. Her eyes met his, unguarded for the first time, and something inside him broke. He had vowed to keep his heart untouched, but tonight that vow felt like chains around his chest. Maya whispered his name, barely audible above the storm. Adrian. That single word shattered the last of his control. He reached for her, pulling her against him, his mouth finding hers with the hunger of a man starved too long. She did not resist. Her hands slid into his hair, her lips answering with equal fire, every ounce of restraint burning away in the heat between them. The candlelight flickered wildly as if struggling to keep pace with the storm of their passion. His jacket fell to the floor, her robe slipping from her shoulders. He pressed her back against the desk, papers scattering like forgotten promises. Their kiss deepened, desperate and tender all at once, every barrier they had built since the wedding crumbling to ash. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Adrian's forehead rested against hers. His voice was raw, stripped of every mask he had ever worn. I can't fight this anymore, Maya. I won't. Her eyes glistened in the glow, her lips trembling with words she had held back for weeks. "Then don't," she whispered. "Don't fight me, Adrian." The storm outside raged, but inside the penthouse another storm had claimed them both, more dangerous than any Damien could unleash. Because it was no longer a war of contracts or reputation, it was a war of hearts, and Adrian Steele had just surrendered. Morning sunlight spilled across the penthouse like an uninvited witness. Adrian stirred awake, his arm draped across Maya's waist, the faint scent of her hair filling his senses. For a fleeting moment, he allowed himself the dangerous luxury of peace. But peace was fragile in Adrian Steele's world, and it shattered the moment his phone began to vibrate violently on the nightstand. He answered, his voice still heavy with sleep, only to hear Gregory from the board hissing urgent words. "The press has Damien's evidence. It's everywhere. They are saying Maya stole intellectual property from his company before the merger. Investors are demanding a response. If you don't distance yourself from her, Steele International will burn with her." Adrian ended the call without replying. His jaw tightened, but when he turned to look at Maya, she was already awake, her expression calm, though her eyes betrayed the weight of what she had heard. She pulled the sheet tighter around her shoulders. "You see now," she said softly, "he won't stop until I am destroyed." Adrian rose, pacing to the window. The city stretched out below, glittering and ruthless. For years he had commanded it with iron certainty, bending rivals to his will. But now the enemy was not across the boardroom table. It was clawing at his marriage, at the one part of his life he could no longer claim was untouchable. "You don't have to fight this for me," Maya said quietly. Her voice was steady but laced with sorrow. "If I step away, if I leave, he will have no leverage. Your empire will be safe." Adrian turned sharply, fury blazing in his eyes. "Do not say that again. You are not leaving. You are not his pawn to move or discard. You are my wife." Her breath caught at the conviction in his tone, but Damien's shadow loomed large. That afternoon, Adrian called for a press conference. The board begged him to reconsider, to let Maya go, for the sake of appearances, but he silenced them with one cold glance. When the cameras clicked and the lights flared, Adrian stood at the podium with Maya at his side. "These allegations are lies," he declared, his voice carrying across the crowded hall. "Damien Cross is a man with a vendetta, not a shred of truth. My wife is not guilty of theft or betrayal. She is guilty only of being the one person Damien could not control." The words sent shockwaves through the room. Investors exchanged stunned glances. Reporters scrambled to capture every phrase. And somewhere in the shadows, Damien himself was surely smiling with the satisfaction of having provoked such a display. But Adrian was not finished. "She is not my wife on paper anymore," Adrian continued, his voice lower now but edged with steel. "She is my partner, my equal, and the future of this company. Anyone who questions that can walk out the door right now." Maya stood silently beside him, her hand slipping into his, their fingers lacing together in full view of the world. To the press, it looked like a calculated show of unity, but to Adrian it felt like something far more dangerous and far more binding. It felt like truth. That night, back in the penthouse, the storm outside had finally quieted, but a heavier one brewed within. Adrian poured himself a drink, his movements sharp with tension. "He knows something else," he said without looking at her. "Damien is too confident. He's holding something back." Maya's heart tightened. She had known this moment would come. She crossed the room, her voice steady though her pulse raced. "He does. And if he reveals it, the war between us will become far darker than you can imagine." Adrian turned then, his gaze locked on hers. "Tell me, Maya. Tell me what you've kept from me." Her silence stretched like a blade between them, and when she finally spoke, her words promised to change Eve. Writhing, the weight of Maya's silence pressed harder than any accusation. Adrian stood before her, his glass forgotten on the table, his entire world narrowing to the flicker of her eyes. "Tell me," he demanded. "No more half-truths, no more walls." Maya drew a slow breath as if steadying herself before a plunge. "Damien was right," she said quietly. "There is something you don't know. Years ago, before my father died, I built a software architecture. It was revolutionary, a system that could predict market collapses before they happened. I hid behind an alias because no one in the industry took me seriously, not as a young woman. I sold that program to investors under a false name, and one of the companies I defeated was yours, Adrian. The confession struck him like a blade. His mind reeled back to that humiliating quarter when Steel International had bid aggressively for a contract only to be beaten by an anonymous developer who had seemed untouchable. It had been one of the rare scars in his otherwise flawless empire. And now he knew the truth. That ghost from the past was the very woman standing before him. Adrian's breath came hard, anger and awe clashing in his chest. "You beat me," he whispered. "You beat me, and then you married me." Her gaze did not falter. "I married you to protect my family, yes, but I never told you because I knew your pride would never forgive me." The silence between them pulsed like thunder. Adrian turned away, his fists tightening at his sides. "All these years I thought I built my empire with unmatched vision, and the one person who managed to outmaneuver me was my own wife." Before Maya could answer, the shrill ring of the phone sliced through the tension. Adrian snatched it up, his voice harsh. "What?" Gregory's panicked voice filled the line. "Damien has leaked the documents. He claims Maya manipulated markets under a false identity. He is saying she is a fraud. Odd that she deceived even you. The press has gone wild. Investors are demanding answers." Adrian's fury sharpened to lethal clarity. He ended the call and turned back to Maya. His voice was low, vibrating with the promise of war. "He thinks this secret will destroy us. He thinks it will destroy you, but I won't let him." Maya stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm. Her touch trembled, though her eyes burned with defiance. "He will use this to break you, Adrian, to break us. And if you stand with me, you risk losing everything." Adrian caught her hand, holding it against his chest where his heartbeat thundered. "Then let it be lost, because I will not abandon you, not now, not ever." At that moment, lightning split the sky, illuminating the penthouse as if the world itself bore witness. They were no longer bound by contracts or appearances. They were bound by a secret that could ruin them both. But Damien was not finished. Even as Adrian held Maya close, even as they vowed silently to fight together, Damien's shadow stretched longer, darker, for he had another card yet to play. And when he revealed it, the Empire of Steel and the heart of Adrian himself would be tested in ways neither had ever imagined. The boardroom was a battlefield waiting to erupt. Adrian entered with Maya at his side, her steps steady though her reputation was hanging by a thread. Every seat around the long glass table was filled, the air heavy with suspicion and whispers. Cameras clicked from the back of the room. Investors demanded answers. And at the far end of the table, Damien Cross waited with the smile of a predator who believed the kill was already his. Adrian's voice cut through the noise before anyone else could speak. "You will all listen. The accusations Damien has spread are lies, wrapped around fragments of truth. Maya Rao did build the architecture that shook markets years ago. But she did not cheat. She did not steal. She beat me and every other competitor with brilliance none of us could match. That is why I stand beside her now." Gasps rippled across the room. Some board members exchanged doubtful glances. Others leaned forward as if caught between awe and fear. Damien rose smoothly, his hand splayed across the table. "Beautiful speech, Adrian. But let us speak of facts." He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a stack of papers, sliding them across the table like daggers. "Inside you will find contracts, transactions, secret accounts, proof that Maya manipulated more than numbers. She manipulated you." The room turned like a tide. Pages rustled, eyes widened, whispers sharpened. Adrian did not flinch. He pushed the documents back toward Damien with one sharp motion. "Forgeries. You have planted a spy inside my company. That is how you obtained these files." Damien's smile widened. "Bold claim. But can you prove it?" Maya stood then, her voice clear and resonant. "Yes, we can." She tapped her phone, projecting a series of emails onto the wall screen, messages intercepted from Damien's mole inside Steel International. each one time-stamped, each one revealing the slow sabotage of their merger. The traitor was Gregory, the longest-serving member of the board. All eyes turned to the man who had once advised caution, his face drained of color as the evidence piled against him. "You cannot," Adrian growled, his voice vibrating with fury. "You cannot betray your own house and expect to walk free." Security moved swiftly, dragging Gregory from his seat as the room erupted in chaos. Damien's calm mask cracked at last, his hand tightened on the edge of the table, his voice rising with venom. "You think you have won, Adrian, but you do not know the whole truth about your wife." The room stilled. Adrian's gaze locked onto Damien's. "What truth?" Damien's smile returned, darker than before. "Ask her about the night she walked away from me. Ask her what she left behind." Every eye in the room shifted to Maya. She stood tall, but a shadow flickered across her face, something even Adrian had not seen before. For the first time since their war with Damien began, doubt slipped into Adrian's chest like ice. The press cameras flashed, hungry for blood. The board held its breath, and in that charged silence Maya whispered to Adrian words that were not meant for anyone else. "If I tell you now, you will never see me the same again." The silence in the boardroom was suffocating. Every eye was locked on Maya as Damien's taunt lingered in the air. Adrian's jaw was tight, his pulse hammering, yet his gaze never wavered from the woman who had turned his world upside down. She had faced storms, betrayals, accusations, but now her silence was heavier than any weapon Damien could wield. Finally, Maya stepped forward, her voice steady, even as her fingers trembled at her side. "Damien wants to twist this moment into another noose around my neck. But the truth is mine to tell. Years ago when I walked away from him, I did leave something behind. Not money, not patents, not secrets. I left a piece of my life." Damien's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he leaned forward. "Go on, Maya. Tell him about the child." The words slammed into the room like thunder. A stunned hush followed, broken only by the rapid clicking of cameras. Adrian felt the ground shift beneath his feet, but he refused to step back. His hand tightened into a fist on the table. Maya lifted her chin. "Yes. Years ago, Damien and I had a son. He was taken from me before I ever held him. Damien sold custody rights in exchange for capital when his empire was drowning. He used our child as collateral and then let strangers raise him." Her voice broke only for a moment before she steadied herself again. "That is the monster who dares accuse me now." The board members gasped. Shock rippled like a wave through the room. Adrian's chest burned as rage surged through him, not at Maya, but at the man who stood across from them with that poisonous smirk. Damien spread his hands mockingly. "Tragic tale, but convenient timing. Do you expect us to believe this without proof?" Adrian slammed his palm down on the table. "Enough. You claim to be a man of power, but you are nothing but a parasite feeding on pain." He turned to the board, his voice strong and unyielding. "Maya Rouse-Steele is my wife and my partner. She has faced more battles than any of you will ever know, and still she stands unbroken. If you cannot see her strength, you do not deserve to sit at this table." The room erupted not with doubt, but with applause. Investors who had been whispering only minutes before now looked at Maya with new respect. Lawrence Brooks, the eldest among them, rose to his feet. "Damien Cross, you are finished here. This board stands with the Steeles." Security moved in, but Damien's voice cut through the clamor one last time, sharp and venomous. "This is not over, Adrian. One day the truth you cling to will destroy you." He was dragged out, struggling, his threats echoing behind him. When the doors closed, silence settled again, heavy but different now. Adrian turned to Maya. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but her spine was straight, her pride unshaken. "You should hate me," she whispered, "for not telling you sooner." Adrian reached for her hand, pulling her close so every soul in the room could see. "I could never hate you. You are the strongest person I know. You think your past weakens you, but it only makes you more extraordinary. And as for Damien, he no longer holds a chain on your life." Maya's breath caught, and then for the first time in front of their empire, she let herself lean into him. He kissed her gently, but with a certainty that silenced every doubt left in the room. Months later, as autumn winds swept across the city, the scandal had died, and Damien's empire crumbled under lawsuits and investigations. Steel International and Rao Technologies soared higher than ever. Yet for Adrian and Maya, success was no longer the prize. One evening, Adrian entered their home to find Maya in the nursery she had quietly prepared. A small crib stood waiting, sunlight spilling across soft blankets. She turned to him, her hand resting lightly on her stomach, her eyes glowing with something fierce and fragile. "We are not just building companies anymore, Adrian. We are building a family of our own." He froze, the realization hitting with the force of destiny. Their child. Not born of manipulation or betrayal, but of love forged in fire. His arms closed around her, as if to shield both her and the life they had created together. That night, as rain pattered against the windows, Adrian whispered against her hair, words he once swore he would never speak. "You are my heart, Maya. My only vow is to love you every day for the rest of my life." And in that moment, he understood the irony so sharp it almost made him laugh. He had once promised never to love her. Now love was the only promise he would never break.